All right. Welcome to the Overcome and Become podcast. This is James Keddington. We are live streaming this to a couple different places. If you want to be part of the uh, Better Me Nation community, you can join our Facebook group. We'd love to have you. That way you can get interact with us live on this live stream. But if you enjoy the podcast and the recording afterwards, then subscribe to the podcast. We'd love to have you this way as well. So I want to share a story with you about me. About 13 years ago, I was in a job, and we're at the tail end of that 2008 recession, about 2 years. That recession kind of lasted a few years, and the company I was with, their layoffs happened near the end of it, and I was part of those layoffs or a restructuring, as this company like to call it. And I knew it was coming, and in fact, I was the one that approached my boss about things needed to change because I saw everything going on at the company and realized the fit's not there. What they need me to do, I'm not happy with. It's a totally different thing, and it's time for me to move on. What I was not expecting, though, was, and the transition happened great, right? But what I was not expecting, though, was the feelings of detachment that I was going to have afterwards. And we had such a great culture at that company, and feeling detached from that impacted me in ways that I was not prepared for. And leading up to this, there's a lot of other things going on in our personal life around that idea of detachment or rejection or instability. And what started happening after I got laid off is I started having nightmares on a pretty regular basis. And all of these nightmares were surrounded around not being allowed back into that group of people where I worked at. It was this feeling of rejection of you don't belong here or you can't be here. And these nightmares became pretty frequent. They were coming at least weekly, I would say for 18 months. And then they started spacing out to a couple times a month. And it was impacting my quality of sleep. It was impacting my desire to actually go to sleep because I was afraid that these nightmares I would have one, and being asleep was worse than being awake. And I would not wake up feeling rested or energized. And so I was afraid of that process of sleeping. And as a result, we've talked about this before, but when you're not sleeping, your frontal cortex stops working right, which means you're not making good decisions. Bad decisions leads to bad food choices, having anger issues when you're short tempered because you're just not doing things you would normally do. Your social filters aren't working right. And so I was gaining weight, not sleeping well. My memory's getting shot. And when you gain weight, then you start sleeping bad again because your blood pressure is higher, your cardiovascular health's not good. And it becomes this vicious cycle. And my wife was like, James, you need to fix your crap. You need to fix stuff. And I got going to therapy. And the lady told me, my therapist told me that I had PTSD. And I was like, no, that's not what this is. I don't, I don't have trauma. Trauma is reserved for other people. That's not what I'm dealing with. I just am dealing with something else. And it took me quite a while to understand that it was trauma, that trauma is not reserved for these catastrophic moments in life that anybody on the outside would look and say, that's a big moment. That's going to screw you up. Of course, you need help. I learned that trauma can be in very simple things that we're just not prepared for, and things that we may objectively look at as silly, and or things that happen to everybody all the time. And for me, getting laid off, that does happen all the time, right? I mean, that happens to lots of people. And so I was discounting those moments. Well, once I learned that what I was going through, I was much better prepared to address what I was feeling and experiencing and my mental health decline. And so that's why we're having this podcast today, not for me to talk about my trauma, but to talk about trauma in general. And I recently met Michael Anderson. He's a certified associate therapist specializing in marriage, family, addiction, with specialty training around this idea of addiction. And I really became interested in this idea of addiction when I went through my course to become an integrative nutrition coach, because they did a deep dive into trauma and how it impacts our overall health and wellness across not just our mental health, but also our physical health and our relationships and our spiritual health. And it was in this moment in this course that I realized, wow, this trauma has been a linchpin in my health journey all along. I need to do a lot more and bring this awareness to a lot more people. And so when I met Michael, I knew I needed to have him here on the podcast. So thank you for joining us, Michael. I really appreciate you being here.
Oh yeah. James, thanks, man. Thanks for having me on and being willing to talk about these types of things. I think more people need to be talking about healing and trauma. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's the more I've learned about this, the more I have come to realize we're all have some sort of trauma that we're
Yeah.
dealing with,
Yep.
or haven't dealt with, right? That's
Yeah.
impacting us in a certain way, right?
Yep.
And so, for everybody listening or watching, let's kind of define what trauma is, because I think that helps set the stage for the types of conversations we're going to have today. So, tell us, what is trauma?
Yeah. Yeah. And I really appreciated the experience you shared. Because I think you're right. I think a lot of people, the trauma, I think is such a loaded word, right? When
Right.
people
Yeah.
hear trauma, they think of like these big things, right? I was attacked or going off to war or whatever, right? These kind of big things that everyone looks at like that's trauma.
Yeah. And the
Um,
branding around the word trauma, like in the emergency room, trauma center, or
yeah,
right, we see these as like crazy big events.
crazy big events. It's scary, and so we resist this idea of like I don't have trauma. I don't want to
Right.
have trauma, right? But it can be really helpful to think about trauma. When we're talking about trauma, basically what we're talking about is unprocessed emotions and memories. And because they're unprocessed, then when I say unprocessed, I mean like neurochemically in your brain. Like your
Right.
brain
Yeah.
hasn't processed them yet.
Yeah.
And so they still affect you here in the present moment, right?
Yeah.
And that comes from not just big things. I mean, we all walk around with unprocessed memories and emotions, right?
Yeah.
That affect the way we show up in the present moment in different contexts, right?
Absolutely. And some of them, and we'll do this later. We'll give a sneak peek to people. We're going to talk about some of my trauma, right? And one of the things
Yeah.
that happens is you start diving into your own trauma, you start unearthing a ton of trauma,
Yeah. Yeah,
right? You're
totally.
like, holy crap, I've got a lot of stuff in the
Yeah.
background here.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
it's kind
Yeah.
of like Pandora's box a little bit, but
Yeah.
it's good though, because like I'll have moments where I'm like, okay, I'm going through this right now because of XYZ. And you can kind of like separate yourself from that moment and experience a little bit deeper mindfulness and ground yourself a little bit more solid and keep a little bit better composure.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, for me, it's really humanizing. Like for me
Yeah.
and for other people, to just realize, man, perfection is not required in order to live a fulfilling, meaningful, beautiful life, right? The fact that we
Right.
all have trauma, we all have it, does not mean that like we're broken. It doesn't mean that we have zero hope of
Right.
of self-actualizing. Like that's not what this means. When we, I think Shrek forever changed the world with the analogy of the onion.
Yeah.
And when you start peeling back the onion and understanding your trauma more, I think it can be scary for a lot of people. I've had clients be like, "Holy
Yeah.
crud! Like I didn't realize any of this was there."
Hmm.
And at first it's scary, but honestly, I think it's really humanizing. It becomes really beautiful to realize that like our pain doesn't define us.
Right.
You
Yeah.
know? Oh, does that make sense? Kind of this idea.
Yeah, absolutely. And we talk, the name of the podcast is Overcome and Become, right?
Yeah.
And this is one of those things that prevents us from overcoming a lot of things until we understand what's going on.
Yeah. Yep.
And if we can't overcome, how do we become our
Yeah.
best, right?
Yep.
And that's why I love, this is why this topic has been on my radar for so long to talk about, because I think it's really, truly one of the number one inhibitors to people becoming their best self. I know it has been for me.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah.
So let's
Absolutely.
talk about a little bit how this shows up, because we've talked about the big ways, right? Like someone goes off to war, they're the only one that comes back in their group, right?
Yeah.
That's a big one, right? But what are
Yeah.
some other ways that trauma shows up? Maybe like in uh like a marriage, not how does it happen, but how does it manifest itself? Because I think for some people, like, well, how do I know if I have trauma if I've not experienced anything big? So
Right.
what are some like signs that people can start looking for that says this might be a result of trauma? Like,
Sure. Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, I'll apologize to your listeners now. I'm getting over some sort of sinus infection. So if I'm like
we both
sniffling,
are, we both
yeah.
are, yeah.
I, sorry if I'm like sniffling into the microphone every now and then.
No, we're
Those
good.
are
We're good.
annoying. So one way you can think about this
Yeah.
is if there are moments in your life in which all of a sudden you find yourself asking, why am I responding like this? Like the bodily emotional response of what I'm experiencing does not seem to match what's warranted, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Um, like and and for a lot of clients, a lot of people I talk to, they say all of a sudden I just felt really young. Like I just felt really scared. I felt really defenseless. I felt really confused. Right? Like these ideas of like how a kid would maybe feel in a big situation. If you have any moments in your life in which that's how you're feeling, then that can be a really good indication, a really strong indication that that's just unprocessed emotions and memories that are showing up in your life, aka trauma, right?
Yeah. Man, when you said that, that reminded me. I know we're gonna do meet later, so we won't dive into this, but I
Yeah.
remember I was like 20 years old and I was playing basketball with a roommate of mine. And I'm not good at basketball. He's way better than me, right? And I know
Yeah.
I'm not good. I've always known I wasn't good.
I
It was
wasn't
never,
good either. I didn't make my 8th grade basketball team and I
yeah,
gave up on that dream. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So there's never this issue that I need to be good, but we were playing just some one on one. And in normal fashion, we were both talking a little trash.
Yeah.
But he said something that shut me down. And literally, I'm not kidding you. I I almost fell to my knees and started bawling,
Yeah.
like crying.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like that's not a normal response to
Right.
getting beat.
Right.
And in that moment, I told him, I said, I don't know why I'm doing this, but all these memories of this friend that I had in high school came back to me, and
Yeah.
and from this very, like, this guy and I, we were used to be really close, and then he did some things that were very damaging and hurtful to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the way like that trash talk happened, it brought those back, and I'm like, why am I like? It was like I was a sobbing like 4-year old, like Billy took my toy.
Yeah.
It was
Right.
so weird.
But what's wild, James, is that there's a neurological explanation for why that's happening, right? Those are memories and emotions that are stuck in what's this deep part of your brain called your midbrain, right?
Uh-huh.
Where the emotional processing happens. They're stuck there. And so it's you can think of it as like they're frozen in time.
Okay.
And so when that part gets activated, that's a part of your neural network that's literally really young.
Yeah.
And so that's why it feels like, why am I responding this way? It's because that's a really young party that's just got activated right there.
Yeah. That's that's wild, because in that moment, there was just so much sadness and remorse.
Yeah.
which you don't feel when it's not a normal emotion when you're playing basketball.
Right. I don't know. There's some teams that I watch that
Well,
I'm a fan of that I
when
get
you're
filled with
when you're
sorrow and
playing and
remorse.
getting beat by one of your good buddies, right? More like feeling competitive, like drive and you know
Yeah,
what I mean?
yeah, yeah,
Not like
yeah.
remorse. Like so that's crazy because we'll go into more of this later. But so that's a very interesting. I think that's a huge tell. What about are there other things that people can look for?
Yes, yeah. Um, if there are situations in your life in which you feel um, the need to like protect yourself,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
Um, this comes up a lot in relationships, especially dating, romantic marriage relationships.
Yeah.
In fact, there's a lot of really good resources out there that have come out here in the last like decade or so about the way trauma affects relationships.
Yeah.
But when you think of behaviors, if you're listening to this and maybe you're thinking either me or my partner, when we experience conflict, one of us shuts down,
Yeah.
one of us pulls away, right? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's you. Is
Well,
that what you're
well,
saying?
both of us. I think depending on the topic and what's going on, we both will.
Sure. Right. Yeah. That's a fight or flight response, or in that case, that's a flight response, right?
Yeah.
But whether you fight or flight, that your desire is to protect, right? So some people, they protect themselves through criticism towards their partner.
Ooh, yeah.
They get really angry, they get really mad, and they're not actually trying to hurt their partner. It's a trauma response. They're actually in self-protection mode, right? They say, if I get
Yeah.
big and angry, then I can protect myself emotionally.
Oh, interesting. So does it look like it's kind of masked? It's a
Yeah.
masking.
Yeah. Oh, totally. Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. The brain is wired for self-protection.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. That's interesting. Are there other things? I'm not saying there should be. I'm just gonna keep asking that until we're out of s-
Yeah.
science.
Yeah. So we haven't explored this yet, but getting really curious with thoughts that come up in different scenarios, right? Let's if you at work, right? If at work, if you have thoughts that like, oh, no one wants to hear my opinion,
Yeah.
right? Or I can't ask for a raise. I'd get rejected anyways, right? Self-defeating thoughts, that can be a sign that there's unprocessed emotion there. There's unprocessed memories, right? For
Right.
some
Right.
reason, a part of you hangs on to that belief that you're not worthy of good things. You're not worthy of getting that promotion. If you're not worthy of acceptance, and that's worth exploring, right? What trauma there needs to get processed.
Yeah, that's really interesting because I think that right there is a sign that we all have trauma because we all have narratives in our head that
Yeah.
say, you're not good enough, you don't look the part,
Yeah.
people don't want you, or and a lot of people call this imposter syndrome, right? They'll
Yeah.
say, oh, we all have imposter syndrome, right? Like you hear like tech executives talk or any executive talk about this, like when they get promoted from like maybe a director level to the C-suite, they have
Yep.
that imposter syndrome. Well, that's part of that thing saying they won't like me, or I can't
Yep.
lead people, or I'm not going to understand money well enough, or
Yep. Well, James, you bring up a point, but basically all like the really buzzword, like pop culture stuff that's popular to talk about on social media,
yeah,
imposter syndrome, people pleasing, boundaries, right? All
yeah,
these like these like topics that like you see on social media posts,
yep,
all those are trauma responses,
yeah,
which I'm saying that not as like to paint this picture of like we're all broken and trauma ridden. Like, no, like that's just part of the human experience and this can all be healed. Like trauma, the brain wants to heal.
right, yeah. And where do we learn about emotion and feeling? Where are we taught this? We're really not, right? Like,
And I was just
there's
about to say, to be honest, James, we're really undereducated on this. Yeah.
yeah, we're super uneducated. There's only a handful of things that we do from the moment we're born to the moment we die.
Yeah.
One of those is breathe, and we're not taught well how to do that. And
Yeah.
another one of those is we feel things.
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
we're not taught, like, like I know I can't do this, but I remember watching someone say, "Hey, list 5 emotions, list 10 emotions."
Sure.
We can't even
Sure.
list 5 emotions. Most people cannot list happy, sad, angry, joy.
Yeah.
It's like it's really hard to get up to, but literally there's many, many, many emotions. So how do we deal with an emotion that we can't even put a name to it,
Can't even put a name to it. Yeah.
right? So why are we expecting ourselves to be good at this if we can't even define what it is that, or even acknowledge what it is that we're experiencing?
I think that's super well said. And just as an important aside too, they've done research to show that even learning to put a name to what you're feeling can decrease the amount of distress that you're feeling.
Wow, that's
So,
awesome.
so if anyone's listening to this, be like, okay, well, then, okay, we are undereducated. Where do I start with this? Just
Yeah.
learning to name your emotions. Be like, I'm feeling sad right now, or I'm feeling
Yeah.
disgust, or I'm feeling whatever it is. Even that just helps to tame what you're feeling.
Yeah. And I think with guys specifically, generically, or even those people with more masculine energy, right? People who, which I'll re-say this again. I've said this before, but masculine energy, feminine energy is not the same as male, female biology. It's just
Right.
depending if you're more an analytical side or a more um, soft side, right? Or a more emotional side. Like, some of those people with more masculine energies tend to talk less about their feelings because they're more process driven, more analytical driven, and feelings do not fall under processes analytics at
Right.
all, right? And
Right.
so so talking about emotion or just acknowledging one is difficult,
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
right?
Yes. Absolutely.
Do you find that those people probably have the most amount of trauma that's unresolved?
You know, it's a good question. I I don't know if there's any research on there that
Okay.
states, but to what I've found personally with clients is I see on both ends. I think both ends can come be a trauma response.
Right, right. Okay.
So, um, so absolutely, I see clients who their brain has learned to protect them by shutting down emotion,
Okay.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but I've also seen clients who their brain has learned to protect them by shutting down logic, right? And so I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
I think wherever you're at, I think it's all about getting curious with yourself and see
That's
what your
awesome.
brain's doing.
So do you think, like, when you're saying that, I think, well, maybe it might be a good idea for some people just to Google search, like, what are all the different emotions, right?
Sure.
Right. I
Yeah.
think that movie, what was that movie, that Disney, or maybe it's a Pixar movie about
The
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 all the
inside out.
emotions, Inside Out.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I think we should all maybe do like a little Inside Out experiment with ourselves,
Absolutely.
right?
Well, that's actually it's funny that so the trauma healing model that I use, the therapeutic model that I use is called internal family systems.
Yeah. Tell us about
Well, it's funny with it's a very common clients will be like, this feels like Inside Out. This is like that Inside Out movie, right?
that.
Because it is all about learning how to become way more in tune with the different parts of us.
Yeah.
And I've found the more you practice that, the more this knowledge about emotions just kind of come to you. So yeah, the we Inside Out comes out a lot actually randomly in my practice for sure.
So let me tell you something I've told people, and you can correct me. Say, James, you're flat out wrong. You need to stop saying this. You're filling the world with
I cannot
misinformation.
wait to shut you down. Whatever comes out of your mouth, go for it.
But I tell people, like, you need to, like, all of our emotions and feelings have a lifespan, and you need to let them live their life.
Hmm.
Some of them are short and are moments, and some may be years or even decades long, right? But if you don't give it its lifespan, eventually it rears its head in a very ugly way.
Yeah.
Would you agree to that, or would you modify that, or would you just nix it and say, stop saying that?
Stop saying that, James. That is completely false. No. No, here's what I really love and appreciate about what you just said is the big irony. I think the big lie that society has sold us on is that we need to be happy all the time. If you look at like any ad you've ever watched, right? It's all about
Yeah.
this will make you happier.
Yeah.
What society has done is it's put a premium on happiness and like demonized everything else, right?
Wow.
And so we treat emotions like some are really good and some are our enemies. And what that it's wrong, and I'll tell you a little more about that in a second. But like what it's done is it's created this really unhelpful relationships it's created this really unhelpful relationship with our emotions, where we want to avoid what we're feeling instead of letting them have their life, right? Their
Yeah.
lifespan. We just say, I don't want to feel anything that's bad. We assign all this meaning to emotions like sadness,
Yeah.
to emotions like anger, to emotions like disgust, right? To emotions, whatever. Like, I can't tell you how many clients I've worked with that come in and say, I was always told that it's bad to get angry. Anger's bad,
Yeah.
right? And what we don't realize is there are no such things as good and bad emotions. There's just such thing as emotions.
And does our brain even understand the differences between them?
What'd you
Or
ask? What'd you say?
does the brain even understand the difference between happy and sad?
It depends on what you mean by that, but neurochemically, yes, right? There's different
Okay.
chemicals and things that
Right.
happen, different processes that happen in the body. And it's important to understand that the brain, we as humans, we actually like evolve, like emotions is an important part of the evolutionary process because emotions give us information.
Okay. Yeah.
So the brain absolutely, right, well, knows the difference between sadness and happy because what the brain's trying to say, right, let's use sadness for example. The body feels sad, and the message that's trying to be communicated to us is not that you're bad for feeling this way. You need to stop feeling this. Something's wrong with you. Sadness is a really beautiful emotion that teaches us that we need usually two things: rest and connection.
Yeah.
That's what sadness is trying to teach you. Trying to teach you, you need to rest here. Something really hard happened and you need to take care of yourself. You need to connect with yourself. You need to connect with other people. But what do we do instead?
We
Right?
isolate ourselves.
We isolate, we
We get busy.
withdraw.
We go to work.
Yeah.
We go
We
take a drive and we
we
yell at
numb
the
out, right?
yeah, yeah.
So then we develop this thing called depression, which
Mhm.
I would propose that depression is just a chronic attempt to avoid our sadness.
Embrace it. Lean into it.
Lean into it. Allow it to have its life, like you said, and allow it to teach you things. Learn from sadness about what you need in that moment and hold it gently. Hold that experience gently.
Oh my gosh, man. I think if we ended here, we'd all have so much just to be like, okay, let me come back in 2 weeks, right?
Sure.
Uh, so
Sure.
let's dive in because we have a uh, we all have, we have a cutoff time here, and I think we could probably go for 3 or 4 hours if we
Sure.
didn't throttle ourselves.
Yeah,
I
yeah, and
want to
I
give you
can
some.
nerd out. You're gonna have to be the one to stop because I can just nerd out about this for hours. So
Okay,
yeah,
so let's get vulnerable with me because I want to talk about the difference between um, trauma experiences and our evolved responses to similar experiences because I feel like some of the trauma that I've had and when I say vulnerable, I'm going to share some stuff with you and with everybody else,
yeah,
things that I've gone through, but then as I'm objectively looking at things saying, is my adult response now a conditioned response I have, or am I still experiencing trauma because I've never dealt with it, right?
sure,
Like in the original emotion, right?
yeah,
So let's use um, one. So I remember being, and it's interesting. I think. Sorry, this is going to be a side note.
yeah,
As I look back and examine a lot of these things that pop up, for me, there's a theme around rejection,
yeah,
and maybe that's why those nightmares from my work were so dominant because it followed a theme from when I was in high school and junior high and grade school and
yeah,
with other things. So do you find that a lot of people have themes?
Yeah, I would I would say that there's kind of like core themes that we as humans experience. One, we all have a core theme of like what we desire in life. I think every
Yeah.
human basically wants to feel accepted and feel valued and important.
Yeah.
And then the inverse fears are what we all experience. We all fear rejection, abandonment, um, a lack of feeling valued, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So for me, I found that there's a common theme around rejection, right?
Yeah.
So I'll share some ones when I was young, and these are ones I'm going to say I feel like as an adult, these are silly to impact me now. And the reason I'm sharing these with you and saying that I feel like they're silly because I want other people to know that if they're looking back on things and feel like they're silly to care about, they're
Yeah.
not. It's
Yeah.
you should care about these, right?
Yeah.
So when I was probably like in the fourth or fifth grade, I remember I was taking a bath and I discovered the joy of splashing, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Now I'd already probably known about it, but I was like, wow, if I slide back and forth on the tub, I can make really cool waves.
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
I didn't know was happening is that I was emptying all the water from the tub to outside of the tub.
Yep.
And that water was finding its way to my parents' closet downstairs.
No way.
And my parents handled it great. There was no trauma from that.
Yeah.
But the next day, I was at the grocery store where my brother worked, and the employee break room was next to the restroom. And I was using the restroom. And as I come out, I hear my brother say, "My stupid little brother
Hmm.
flooded the house last night."
Yeah.
And I remember him telling a girl that. Now looking back, I'm like, he was 16 trying to
Sure.
impress a girl.
Sure.
Which one of us haven't done something like that?
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
But as a 9-year-old, like I didn't know how to deal with that kind of like he's my brother. He's supposed to be like
Yeah.
this is where I get emotional, right? Because it's
Yeah.
like he's supposed to defend me. He's supposed to make sure I'm safe.
Yeah.
And now he's throwing me to the wolves
Yeah. Yeah.
for like embarrassment and shame.
Yeah.
Why would he do this to me?
Yeah.
And I didn't. I remember just leaving. I remember like telling my parents like, why? Why would he like? But that's still like I don't think that one sits with me as much as others.
Yeah.
Probably because I did talk to my parents about that one.
Yeah.
But we but that still sits with me. Like it's one of those things that says you're not enough or you're rejected. Like it's on that ticker board that says here's another example where you're not enough. Here's another one, right? Or another one, and I'm going to use siblings here because I think oftentimes it comes from our family because we're closest to our family. We have more experiences with them.
Yeah.
I took my sister's bike once, again, probably the same age, and she got mad at me. Shocking, right? Siblings, we get mad at our siblings when they take our
Sure.
stuff.
Never happens. Yeah.
James, you always break things. Oh, another example. I'm not enough. I'm not enough. Right.
Yeah.
Now, my older brother, I don't think ever listens to these podcasts. So I don't need to like apologize to him. My sister, I think she does listen. Christina, you've also said so many awesome things that have made my life beautiful. So don't feel bad. All right. I love you, sister. All right.
You
Okay.
covered your base. Yeah.
There you go. But like that's something simple. But like, how do I now as an adult, when I go make a sales call, like I'm terrified sometimes. I remember I was gonna go into this building and like talk to people,
Yeah.
and I probably sat in the car paralyzed for 30, 45 minutes.
Yeah.
Now, is that like am I experiencing trauma in the car or am I not or do I need to deal with that other stuff so I can then go do this stuff first?
The short answer is yes, could be, right? Could be
Okay.
to either of those things, right? We would need to explore that a little bit. The long answer is I've absolutely seen connections like that with clients, right? You know, where they usually start with, hey, I was like in my car for like 30 minutes paralyzed for this sales call. I couldn't get out of the car and couldn't go do this, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know what's going on. Like I'm a successful salesman.
Yeah.
I have all the success in life. He's like da 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 da. I don't know why I couldn't get myself out of that car. And then as we do exploring, they go back in their subconscious to that memory, right?
Yeah.
Of being told I was a stupid little brother, right?
Yeah.
And it clicks for them, and they say, "Oh my gosh, I've never processed through that." So the long answer could be, James, totally that could be a case, right? Where those things are connected.
Yeah. That's interesting. So here are some other things that I've seen show up. Either I think this impacts a lot of us too. I guess before I dive into that, what are some things that people can do in that moment? I'll share with you one thing that I've done, and maybe there's other things,
Yeah.
but I do what's called emotion stacking,
Okay.
right? So I will say, okay, I've got all these narratives running through my mind. I've got the girl saying, no, I don't want to play with you when I'm like 8 years old. Like, I,
Yeah.
whatever, stupid, right? I've got this happening. I've got this experience. So I've got all these things saying, validating this emotion that I'm not enough.
Yeah.
So what I've done is I say, okay, what are all the times that go against that?
Sure.
Like, oh, what about the time you got like this award at work and you got this here? And
Yeah.
remember when you moved to a new town and you knocked on all those doors looking for a friend and you found some?
Yeah.
Like, you were resilient against that, right?
Yeah.
And then what about this time? And what about this time? Like, I'm now like not just balancing the scale, but tipping it against what that narrative says.
Yeah.
And even talking about that now, like, I'm like, dude, I'm freaking awesome.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Sure. Yeah.
Like that's a bunch of bull crap in my head, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
But so I call that emotion stacking, where I'm like, okay, I've got these negative emotions or negative experiences. What's the opposite?
Yeah.
What are times that I've had to prove this wrong?
Yeah. That that's great. That's a in cognitive behavioral therapy, that's a main way of going through that, right? Okay, let's challenge the thoughts and the fears and the emotions that are showing up in us, right? And that helps a lot of people, especially to help override the initial trauma response, right?
Right.
You willing to kind of go on a little journey with me for a moment here?
Let's do this.
See if it helps. Let me give you a little bit of background here. And
Okay.
all this is for the sake of presenting just another way to work through these types of scenarios for
And
you.
if you want to, I'm giving you permission to use me as a guinea pig for everybody watching or listening.
You're all right. You're all right with that?
We can do this. I will get raw and I will be unfiltered.
Okay. You are the man, James. Before we jump in, can I take a few minutes and maybe just explain a little bit about internal family systems?
Yep.
IFS, just so you kind of know what you're getting yourself into a little bit.
Yep.
Okay, so let me explain real quick again about trauma and how your brain responds to trauma. Okay.
Okay.
So deep in your midbrain, in your subconscious brain, that's where emotions and memories are kind of stored and processed initially, right?
Yeah.
Made up statistic, but 99% of the time that process works great, right?
Yeah.
You have emotions, memories, your brain processes it, kind of sends it out to the rest of your brain, and your brain kind of can integrate, incorporate it, and you move on with daily life, right? But there are certain events that are distressing enough where the emotions and the memories aren't processed in the midbrain, and in fact, they get stuck there, and so it never processes it, right? And in fact, your brain can get kind of tricked into thinking, because those emotions and memories are still there, your brain can get tricked into thinking that you're still in danger, right?
Gotcha.
if something happens that reminds you of that emotion, of that memory, your midbrain's like, yeah, look, it's still right there. We haven't moved on from it yet. The danger is still very real, right? I just described kind of a simple version of what trauma is, right?
Yeah.
And so what your brain will do, because your brain doesn't know what to do with the emotions and the memories, it'll just say, let's try and stuff this as deep into our subconscious as possible because we don't know how to deal with it. And let's put up barriers to block us from ever feeling that pain. So there's a model of therapy called internal family systems, or IFS, that conceptualizes things like this. That trauma, those memories and emotions that are stuffed deep into your midbrain, kind of exiled away. IFS conceptualize that as a part of you that's been exiled. Okay. So you have an exiled part. Is that making sense so far?
Yep. It's like Bruno.
Yeah.
Bruno's been exiled.
Yes, we don't talk about it. Exactly. Okay. We shove it away. And then you have the other parts of you that work to protect you from ever having to experience that exile.
Grandma. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah. Yes, exactly. Like grandma, how hard grandma works to be like, don't look at that. Don't talk about that. Let's just keep moving. We're good.
Yeah.
Exactly. So in IFS, we call the parts of us that hold the trauma, that are stuffed deep away, we call those our exiles. And the parts that go around trying to make sure we never experience those exiles, we call those our protectors.
Okay.
Making sense so far?
Yeah. I like how I've taken many things back to cartoon movies, but keep going.
Well, and I've never made the connection with Encanto, so now like you just gave me another metaphor to use with clients. So thank you.
Okay.
And so protectors look like all those things that we talk about with people pleasing parts of us, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Overeating parts of us, right? Angry parts of us, right?
All addiction too.
Addiction, absolutely, right? Let's just numb out this pain as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
We all have parts of us that just try and protect us from having to feel pain from the trauma, from the exiles. Okay?
Okay.
And our exiles are the parts of us that hold the pain. Now, each of these parts are in your neural network, and so they're overlaid with fears, beliefs, thoughts, emotions, right? That show up in different parts of us, right? That's why you can be sitting in a car, and the idea of making that sales call can trigger this part of you, this exiled part of you that feels unlovable, unworthy, inadequate, right? Disposable. And so then it'll trigger other parts of you, protectors, to say, well, let's just not deal with that. Let's stay in the car. Let's numb out. Let's watch Netflix for an hour, like whatever it is, right?
Yep.
Is all that making sense?
Totally makes sense.
Okay. All right. So
unfortunately, it's like very familiar making sense. So
sure.
Okay.
Well, that's how it is for all. Like everyone, when clients start learning about this idea of internal family systems, we're like, that's their response is like, yeah, this makes a lot of sense, right?
Yeah.
And we call it internal family systems because all these parts of you, whether you realize it or not, are all interacting with each other.
Yeah.
They fight like siblings fight, right? My overeating part argues all the time with my go exercise and be fit part.
Yeah.
Right? They hate each other.
Yep.
Right? They just kind of interact like one big happy family.
Yeah.
So the way we heal these parts, one big way we heal these parts is learning how to interact with them the same way a parent would interact with a scared child, right? All these parts of us really are just scared. That's all they are. They don't want to do what they're doing. They don't, right? I've never met someone who's like binge drinks on the weekends who are like, in my core, I really want this. No, like they don't want to be doing what they're doing, but it's just the only way they know how to protect, right?
Right. Yeah.
And so we learn how to treat these parts of us with the same love that they were needing all those years ago. Same love and acceptance, right? Okay. Is that a good enough backdrop, do you think, to kind of do some work? Do you have any questions for me?
Yeah. I kind of want to not go deep, but just when I used to hear the word love and acceptance, I used to feel like, oh my gosh, we're getting so like too lovey-dovey, touchy-feely,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
I think a lot of like macho guys, the Johnny LaRussos in the world,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? I think we hear that and we think, "Oh, I'm checking out," right?
Yep.
Don't check out, guys. Like, love and acceptance is like, think about like what you said. Like, if you have a 3-year-old kid come up onto your lap, are you going to be like, toughen up, you little wuss, or are you going to be like, hey, what's up, bud?
Yeah.
That's what we mean by love and acceptance.
Yep. Exactly. It's
And
realizing that these
it's
are
okay to do
all
that to yourself.
it. Not only is it okay, but like even if after that wonderfully put said James, if there's still people who are like, I don't buy into it, like even if you can just start with curiosity on the fact that like research is showing more and more this is how we heal trauma.
Right. Yeah. Okay. All right. We can move on now. I just
All
wanted
right.
to address that because I feel like there's a lot of guys out there that feel like when they hear that, they just kind of get turned off, not really understanding what we're talking about.
Yep. Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So let me make sure I understand you correctly, James. You're saying you feel like there's a part of you, a young part around 9 years old, that feels like carries that feeling of rejection.
9 years old, 5 years old, 16 years old.
Yeah. So even younger than 9, would you say?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. You willing to be curious, open-minded with this?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. What I'm going to ask you to do is, first off, will you just go ahead and focus in on that 9-year-old boy? Just kind of focus in on him. And if you feel like it needs to be younger, does it feel like is 9 about the right age, or do you feel like he's actually younger?
That's a good one. That's a good one.
Okay, cool. Just go and focus in on him, and let me ask you, as you focus on him, how are you feeling towards him?
What do you mean? How do I feel towards him?
Yeah, how are you feeling towards him? Yeah, as you're focusing in on him.
Scared for him.
Feel scared. Yeah. So there's a part of you that feels scared for this little boy.
Yeah.
Go ahead and focus in on that scared part of you.
Okay.
And I'm going to ask you to do something. I just want you to ask that part of you. You can just do this internally. I just want you to ask that part of you what he's scared of. And then just listen. Just listen for what shows up. And what are you noticing?
He's scared that people won't see past this and see what I really am.
Yeah.
So when I was young, I was born with a cleft lip and palate.
Yeah.
So if you look, like my nose is like not like even, right? But when I
Yeah.
was young, the scars were prominent. The impact of the reconstructive surgery was big, and so people didn't see past it. They just wanted to pick fights or make fun of me.
Pick fights, make fun of you. So is that making sense then, what this part is saying to you?
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you to do something. Are you okay to keep going, or
Go as deep as you want to go. Yep.
I'll keep checking in on you and make sure. I'm going to ask you to do something differently than you ever done with this scared part of you before.
Okay.
I want you to just go and focus in on it again. And just let that part know that makes sense. Those fears make sense. And let it know that it's okay that it has those fears. How do you feel towards that scared part of you?
I feel like someone's backing me up. I got someone in my corner.
That's the one in your corner. Will you just take a moment and just let that part know how you feel towards it? Let that part know that you're there for it. So that was just a real short intervention, but tell me, what was that like for you?
Well, I've thought a lot about those moments, but I never thought about that aspect of um, people seeing deeper,
Yeah.
right? Being
Yeah.
afraid of people staying on the surface with me
Yeah.
and not willing to get to know the real James because of what they see.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Never thought about that before.
Yeah. And maybe this isn't, maybe hopefully this is fair to say to a certain extent, then that's even kept you from going deeper and understanding the real James.
Yeah, probably for sure. You know,
So there's a, I mean, this, what IFS is all about and what the research around IFS has shown is that we can actually access different parts of our subconscious and our brain, right? These different parts of us.
yeah,
And we can finally allow the emotions that are stuck to process and be
yeah,
released. Once we finally stop fighting what we're feeling and make room for what we're feeling and get to know what we're feeling, get to know these parts of us, like build a relationship with these parts of us, right? Like inner critics.
right.
People like come to therapy like my inner critic just like kicks the crap out of me and I've tried everything to get rid of my inner critic. I'm like, okay, well, what if we actually stop trying to get rid of your inner critic? What if we got to know your inner critic and got to realize, what if we just asked it why it's doing what it's doing?
Yeah,
And inner critics are scared. They're some of the most scared parts of our system. They
for
need
sure.
they need so much love.
That's so interesting because I'll just kind of step out of this objectively. Like so often I look at these experiences as um, the answer, but they're not. But what I'm hearing here is they're like a map to the answer.
Yeah. Tell me, yeah, I'm actually really curious. Tell me more about what you mean by that.
Well, like I always thought, okay, like it feels like when I described that emotion stacking, like the answer was, okay, I acknowledge where I've been rejected. Now the solution is
Right.
find times where I haven't been rejected.
Right.
But it by going a level deeper, it's like it wasn't about the rejection; it was about becoming seen and heard.
Yeah.
It was more about that, and more about you have value to offer the world, and nobody wants to. Does anybody want to see what you offer? Right?
Right. Right.
Do they even care about you? Do they? Right? And
Yeah.
so when I go to that level, it's now like, oh, this is like those experiences were saying, hey, here's where you need to be looking, not this is what you found.
Yes. Yeah.
Right.
Yep. And the key to that is well, now it's time to finally give the acceptance, the validation, the love that
Yeah.
those parts were needing all those years ago.
Yeah.
Right here, right now. Right? You give that to them. You allow them to finally feel seen and feel heard.
Yeah. So is this where like I hear some people talk about like write a love letter to yourself or write a letter to the person that hurt you and get it all out and say what you've always wanted to say? Is that where this comes into play, or is this something different, or the different mechanisms for a for giving these feelings the attention that they need? Like,
Yeah, I think whatever work if that stuff works for people, then I say go for it, right? I mean,
yeah,
uh, whatever allows you to actually feel like you're finally giving these parts of you the attention that they need, right?
okay,
From an IFS perspective, that they would say, something like that, right? Like if that works if that helps that part to finally feel seen and heard, then
yeah,
awesome, right? And there's more to like this is just we're scratching the surface on like what the healing process looks like with
yeah. We spent eight
IFS.
minutes, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
there's,
this is not. Yeah,
there's whole neurological like this whole process is an intervention that we go through to really finally help all these emotions kind of get processed. But short answer, I would say if stuff like that helps, I mean, like there's tons of awesome research about journaling, right?
yeah,
And about how effective it is just to finally help you get those emotions processed for sure.
Yeah.
But if it doesn't help you, I don't want anyone to listen to this who's like journaling has traditionally never helped, right? Or whatever.
Yeah.
I don't want them to feel like they have to be able to do that. There's other, if it's one mechanism for you that helps, great.
Right. So let's dive into one more topic that I know you specialize in, and I think
Yeah.
it's key. Um, the impact of addiction on trauma. And the
Okay.
reason I want to go here is you've said a number of things that allude to that, um, that kind of talk about this idea of we're really protecting ourselves. And it feels like what, a numbing, right? Which I
Yeah.
feel like addiction is a protective mechanism. It's a numbing thing.
Yeah.
And we see a rise in video game addiction, pornography addiction, um, just being on your phone texting, right? Just
Yeah.
tech addiction. We know that food is an addiction, and there's a lot of emotional as well as biological reasons for food,
Yeah.
right? Like especially related to sugar, right?
Yeah.
And then of course you have your stereotypical addictions of alcohol, drugs, gambling,
Yeah.
tobacco, right? You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
So if we break it down, how does someone know that they're developing an addiction as a result of trauma versus an addiction result of rewiring how their brain responds to stuff? Or is that the same thing?
Let me make sure I state correct. So how do we know if this addiction is formed because of trauma or because of what? How'd you phrase it?
Well, we just made bad choices and now our brain's rewired to have this be our reward center.
Oh, gotcha. Which I think it's worth saying that when working through addiction, um, there's usually an overlap of those two all the time, right?
Okay.
And it's kind of like what comes first, the chicken or the egg. Sometimes the trauma hits first, right?
Okay.
And then they fall into addictive behaviors to help numb out that pain, to help deal with the
Right.
trauma that hasn't been dealt with. And sometimes the bad habits form first, right? You're just like a kid and you stumble upon porn when you're
Right.
8, right?
9.
9, right? Like whatever it is, right? And
I'll let people put 2 and 2 together there.
sure. And then trauma happens or whatever, and your brain's like, you're like 9. So your brain's like, the only way I know how to deal with this is this kind of helps numb it. So let's try that, right?
Yeah.
So what comes first, chicken or the egg, right? But usually when helping people heal from, so I work mostly with porn.
Okay.
Although I've worked with clients who overindulge with eating, right? Who self-medicate, things like that.
Right.
But I'll just use porn as an example. Usually it's a combination of two things. It's one, let's help you heal underlying trauma, right? By trauma, just mean unprocessed emotions and memories that your body's trying to protect you from.
Yep.
But then let's also give you mindfulness tools and the skills that you need in order to help rewire your brain from the habit, right?
Right.
How to process urges when they come, right? How to sit with it, how to just go through the deconditioning process. So I think
Yep.
I think it's usually always a combination of the two.
So addiction, for people who don't understand, I mean, when you become addicted, like your brain, it becomes wired toward that. This is not a simple thing like willpower or I'm just going to stop doing X. Like
Right.
our brain, like we have these hormones and chemicals released, dopamine, serotonin, a lot of these things, and these are powerful things that are out of our control, and our brain becomes conditioned to like this is your MO for life,
Right.
and you're literally rewiring
Yeah.
all the circuits.
Yeah.
Am I right?
Yeah. I mean, um, so much of helping people like heal from porn is helping them learn how to sit with the uncomfortability of not getting the dopamine hit, right?
Yeah.
Not getting the serotonin hit. I'm not getting all those things
Yeah.
because that's what our brain does, right? Our brain gives us these things called urges, right?
Yeah.
That are uncomfortable as a way to say this really uncomfortable feeling will stop if you just go get if you just go view the porn, right? Or whatever, right?
Right.
And so much of that is learning how to rewire the brain. But what I think a lot of people go wrong is they separate the two, even unknowingly, right? They try and they go after the trauma and they heal the trauma, which is important, but they never address like the conditioning process,
Yeah.
right? Or vice versa. They go all about like willpower, right? Behavior control. Just don't view, like stop, resist,
Yeah.
without ever going underneath and healing the underlying wound that the porn protects them from.
So, a while ago, I was working with a person, and they were telling me, like, so part of my practice, like, there's a lot of like weight issues, right? Just
Yeah.
naturally, when you're doing health and wellness, people want to fix their weight, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's why this person came to me, because they saw how much weight I lost. And as we dove deeper, we realized that there were addictions to food and other things.
Yeah.
But then we kept diving deeper, and many issues of trauma with this person's parents, right?
Mm-hmm.
Person always struggling. Are you suggesting then that, like, perhaps it's not so much the diet choices they're making they need to work on, but they need to work on, let's heal that relationship with your parents, and that's going to make it easier for you to have a better weight?
I would change that slightly and say, not necessarily let's fix the relationship with your parents.
Okay.
Let's fix the rupture that's happened in your relationship with yourself as a result of your relationship with your parents.
Yeah,
Does that make sense?
absolutely. And I'm going to just interject a personal side note, and not a personal, but like like uh I don't know, I'll just say it. So we talk about overcome and become in this world of integrative wellness, and I tell people all the time, the solutions you are looking for are usually not found in the same category where the symptoms are showing themselves.
Right. Yep.
So
Yep.
you are trying to cut back on your weight in this example. The solution may not be with food choice.
Yeah.
The solution may be with an emotion that you haven't dealt with. Now, certainly you've got to eat better. Like dealing with the emotion isn't going to make you lose weight,
Right.
but it's going to help you stick to that new diet. It's going
Yes.
to help you with the discipline. It's going to help you not resort back to food as a coping mechanism.
Yeah. That's what going back to what I said earlier, we try to
Yeah,
separate those two facets, but they always overlap. Yeah.
right. So I just want people to kind of hear that, like, there's so many things in our life, not just trauma related or mental health, but there's anything that's inhibiting your ability to become your best self. Don't limit the solution options into the same bucket as to what you're trying to fix.
Yep. Yep. That's really well said. Yes. Absolutely agree.
Man, like there is, we've got to wrap it up here. And I think this is a great time, because I think if we go one more notch, we're going to violate some other obligations we both have. So,
Yeah. Sure.
but I want to thank you so much for spending time with us today on this. I know this has been extremely helpful to me, and I know it's going to be very helpful to other people as well. Is there any one last bit of advice you want to give to people who are on the fence thinking, where do I start? What do I do? Everything you've said is like starting to like click for me, and I'm starting to understand where I need some help. What are my next steps? What can I do on my own if I don't have access to this, or if shame's in the way of actually getting professional help? Like, what advice do you have for people?
Yeah. Yeah. A couple facets there. One, I think one of the most important words in the English language is curiosity. Like I said, bringing this full circle to what we talked about in the beginning of this episode, society, one of the biggest lies society has ever sold us on is this idea we always need to be happy.
Yeah.
Which keeps us from being really curious with our emotions, with ourselves, with our past. Because we get this idea that our past and our emotions and ourselves are really dangerous. They'll destroy us. It's scary, right? We can't feel it. But one of the most helpful things in my own journey that I ever did was I decided I was just going to practice being curious with myself. When hard emotions came up, instead of forcing them away, I'm just going to sit. Let me just be curious with this for a little bit. Let me just sit with this for a few minutes. Let me sit with this for a few minutes longer than I've ever sat with it, right?
Yeah.
When negative thoughts would go in my brain, instead of trying to like, oh crap, I'm being negative again. Okay, be positive, be positive, be positive. No, instead I was like, let me just be curious with this negative thought. And the more I got curious with my thoughts and my emotions, the more I realized how not dangerous they are. They're a part of my experience, but they're not my experience. Like they're not all of me.
Yeah.
So that is just in general, I think curiosity is the best place, especially if you're like, going back, you're like, self-love. What's self-love? That's lame, right? Okay, we'll just start with self-curiosity because I promise the more curious you get with yourself, the more you're going to start to learn how to love yourself, right? So start with curiosity. If they're interested in IFS, right, in that framework of how to heal trauma, but maybe they're not ready, they don't know where to find an IFS therapist, or they're not ready for like coaching or anything like that, there's a book that I recommend called No Bad Parts. It's a great place to start reading. It was written by Richard Schwartz. He's the developer of IFS. I assume he knows what he's talking about. He's a pretty smart man.
Yeah.
That's a great place to start. If you're like, I know I want to work on myself, but I'm not fully ready for like either therapy or coaching, I'd start there with that book.
Dude, phenomenal. Hey, thank you so much again. Thank you to everybody who's watching the replay or watch us live or listening to the podcast. You guys are awesome. And again, Michael, thank you for your time and your sharing all your knowledge and experiences with us. We really appreciate you.
So good to be on. Thanks a lot, James.
All right. Bye-bye.